thought I'd talk for maybe 30 minutes and then have it be a discussion. It feels a little bit like I'm here to report on what I did at Kent, because I was here a couple of years ago when I first took this job.
A lot has changed, though.
And Joel and Harding told Joel to invite me to come up here. Had a very good discussion at that time about what might be coming up, and now I'm here to report on what's actually happened. I know that not all of you are terribly familiar with, or I assume that not all of you are terribly familiar with Knight Foundation. So I want to give you just a real thumbnail sketch of the place and tell you why it's so important to me that my predecessor, Harding Carter, is here. The Knights started the foundation in conjunction with running newspapers in a whole bunch of cities throughout the United States. There's actually a fantastic tape of Jack Knight, whom I never had the privilege of meeting, and I really mean that as it would have been a great privilege to meet him. But on the tape, Jack, who was not particularly well known for his generosity during his lifetime, criticizes his fellow rich colleagues, saying that they're pretty stupid for not doing intelligent tax planning. And he says, as far as I'm concerned, I don't want the tax man to get my money, so I've set up this foundation. He, in fact, and it worked. For most of the 60 years of the foundation, a major purpose of the foundation was to do good works in the towns where Jim and Jack ran their business. I don't mean to suggest that not good things happen, but that you must understand that was the driving force behind the operation of the foundation. There was a combination of people that worked both in the newspaper company as well as in the foundation, and as well as oversaw the foundation. And it really wasn't until after the demise of both Jim and Jack, who left significant fortunes to the foundation, that Creed Black was hired. The foundation moved from Akron to Miami, began to have some national aspirations, but it still was informed by the relationship with the Knight newspapers, which now were Knight Ridder newspapers. So much so that when I went to the Miami Herald, when I first went to the Miami Herald, Dave Lawrence, who was then the publisher of the Herald, was the person who would determine what happened with Knight Foundation money in Miami, and that was repeated in the various other communities. And Dave actually had on his staff at the Miami Herald newspaper company, had on his staff a wonderful woman who would review grant requests through the Herald for Knight Foundation, and he would then recommend to the distribution committee, which was the trustees from Knight Foundation, and they would approve it. Dave would then send out a letter on Miami Herald stationery saying, "Here's $5,000 I got for you, Ed, from the Knight Foundation. I got for you from that." So there was that kind of a connection. There are many, many things for which I'm grateful in Harding Carter. The chief among those, however, besides deciding to leave the job when I was ready to take it, that was brilliant. But the most important thing to me as his successor was the way that he managed to wrest control of Knight Foundation from the newspaper publishers. He did it. There's another example. If you look at Gannett and Freedom Forum, what became Freedom Forum, there's a way of doing it that says, "I'm independent, and the pain you feel in your eye is me poking my finger in your eye." And my friend Al Newhart did it that way. He went at independence in a very, very open and aggressive aggressive way. Hotting, I remember when by then I was publisher of the Herald, called up and he said, you know, I've been thinking, I think you ought to set up an advisory committee, and then that advisory committee, instead of being advisory to the publisher, was advisory to Knight Foundation, and then instead of my running the thing, it was well, you can serve as chair for one. And I said, I hope you understand that I know what you're doing. And it was all done, he paid in time, but in the end, what we ended up with was an operation, even before Knight Ridder ceased to exist. We ended up with an operation that was genuinely Knight Foundation as an independent, separate entity, which it always legally was, but now functionally was. And of course, with the disappearance and the sale of Knight Ridder Company to McClatchy, that by then I was president of Knight, and that just simply further cemented our independence. But that was a really very, very significant change in the history of the foundation. What hadn't changed so much was the focus on the communities, and the structure of Knight Foundation was still set up basically to receive ideas from communities that Knight would then support. And that was consistent in many ways with the way that Jim and Jack structured their newspaper company, but it made learning, I think, extremely difficult. It made impact difficult. It made the quality of programs uneven. And so we had, for example, at one point, 18 different education programs. But they were 18 different responses in 18 different towns and cities. Some of them were preschool, some of them were middle school, some of them were high school, and there wasn't really an opportunity to compare and contrast, because they just were so different one from the other. The other thing that had happened is that the world of journalism, where Knight was preeminent in the training of journalists, it was by far the biggest funder of journalism programs. I venture to say it was even bigger than the industry put together as the funder of training programs for journalists, either at undergraduate level, graduate, or even in mid-career. But suddenly, and really it felt very sudden, it was really more like an implosion ultimately, the world changed on the industry. And so we found ourselves with almost 24 endowed chairs of journalism, and it struck me that what we were headed toward was the teaching of best practices in a world we didn't know, in a world we couldn't fathom. And that struck me as something that needed adjustment. In all of this, I want you to know, again, this is absolutely the truth. There is nobody who was more supportive and frankly more thoughtful as a thought partner than Hotting every time I called, or every time we'd see each other at a conference and go off for coffee and we'd talk about it, because it is just an unbelievable piece of luck to be able to talk with somebody about the problems you're facing without having to explain any of the background, because he was already there. So what we decided to do was to pause the business of training. We modified some of the ones we had and shifted them to digital training, to training for digital platforms, and we began to experiment internally with contests as a way basically saying we're not sure where things are going, but we're fairly clear that information is going to be disseminated and received on digital platforms. And so we started with a night news challenge, which offers $5 million a year, still does, for ideas to deliver news and information on digital platforms to geographically defined communities. So it's news and information that's generally shared to geographic communities, digital platforms, basically 3 rules. And we had, in the very first year, we had 2,500 applications. It was a tremendously important, internally important and useful tool for getting the foundation staff, frankly, to be open to the idea that we don't have to have the answer, to the idea that to the possibility that maybe our best contribution is in supporting experimentation, and to being open to different ways of thinking about journalism and thinking about the delivery of information. I've been absolutely delighted with the way that has impacted both our thinking at the foundation and a lot of thinking in the news business. We had to find a way to move quickly into the digital world. I was disappointed and a little surprised at how much more resistance I found from journalism schools than from newsrooms. I knew the kind of resistance that these ideas were going to have from newsrooms because I'd been in and around them for 25 years. I was surprised at the there now, take an aspirin, lie down, and we'll call you back later. And I said, well, fine. When you want the money, give me a ring. I mean, it was almost as crass as that, because ultimately, otherwise it wasn't going to move. I would say Berkeley and USC were remarkable for their jumping on this opportunity, NPR as well. You may have heard the tagline that we use on NPR, which is the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation helping NPR and do excellence in journalism in the digital world, and that comes from our taking every member of the NPR staff to Berkeley or USC for digital media training. It isn't a matter of, I'd say it's not the most innovative program in the world, but it is ultimately taking, I think, the most important news entity on radio and making them able to compete rather than just simply saying you've got to do this. Beginning to expose people to the tools that they're going to need, and I know that it's having. This is an informal way of measuring impact, Joel. But one of the ways that I know we're having impact, I was talking with Ari Shapiro, who does the justice beat for NPR, and I asked him if he had gone to the course. He said no, and he said, but I know it's having an effect. I said, how come? He said, we were having a meeting the other day about a story, and they were talking about also doing video for the online portion, and somebody said, well, if you do this, it's okay, but if you do this, that, and the other thing, then it becomes NPR quality video. And I thought, yes, that's the concept you want. So we started pushing along those lines early on. We needed partners. We were looking for ways to engage other foundations. I think I misunderstood my role. I was talking with Joel earlier. I think about this as logical evolution of media. I think about the guiding quote for me in all of the things that Jack Knight has written, and he wrote almost nothing about the foundation, but the guiding quote for me in managing the foundation is one in a speech in Akron some 55 years ago, where he said that the purpose of a great newspaper was, I'm paraphrasing, was to inform and illuminate the minds of its readers so that the people may determine their own true interests. So his concept, it seems to me, could not possibly be more modern in a crowdsourcing world. It does not say these are the people's interests. It says the purpose is to inform the community so that the people may determine their own true interests. And moving toward that, it struck me that we needed to have more partners. I found it almost impossible to get some of the other foundations that I thought might originally be interested. It turns out they were interested in their own things. You know, figure that. And so it wasn't until recently that I began to figure out that the way to talk about this is not to talk about media, not to talk about journalism, but to talk about the things that they're interested in, to talk about equality, to talk about access, economic equal opportunity, and how media and information works into that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. As a marker of 2 years ago, there were a couple of things that in thinking of the four-legged stool that Joel sets out in a book about leadership, vision, impact, and measurement as you're thinking about managing a foundation. The feeling I wanted to have in the foundation, in Knight Foundation, was of a fast shift from charity to social investing. And as I say, because of the structure of the way we had been set up, the publishers would typically do nice charitable projects, as opposed to projects that were intended to change the nature of a community, or even or even thinking about looking for sustainability and that sort of thing. And being very, very hard on I think on the staff, insisting that if we were Jack Knight, which none of us was, it was fine to do charity with the money, but when he sought the protection of the tax laws, then we were required to do something more with it. We were required by the agreement that he had made with the government to leverage the money to make sure that it was something that had long-range impact. We started to explore whether we could leverage both sides of our house, the community program and the journalism program, which had acted independently in the very same way that newsrooms have a business side and have a newsroom, and they never fit together. And then tried to start looking for opportunities to do programs that could be compared one against the other by doing similar programs in a variety of communities. So we focused very, very hard on journalism, in part because it was changing so fast, in part because, frankly, it's what I knew best. It's what the Knight brothers did. And we focused on consolidating the gains we had made in communities, decreasing purely responsiveness and emphasizing donor intent. And we also decided to gear up for a very different kind of public relations than we had before. I think the foundation comes from a tradition, a newspaper tradition, where the newsroom almost never writes about what the company does. I remember being at Newsday, which ran the Long Island Marathon, which actually was called, to everybody else in the world, the Newsday Marathon. And there were thousands of people who would run in the marathon, and the banners said Newsday, and the photographer would always be sure to take a picture that did not include the banner. And although everyone else ran in the Long Island Marathon, Newsday always reported. I mean, in that in the Newsday Marathon, Newsday always reported the Long Island Marathon. I really don't think that's a very good way to run the programs of the foundation, and I'll show you some of the impact of what we've done. I think it is enormously useful to tell people what we're doing, to tell people why we're doing it. It's useful in terms of having other people come up with ideas, in terms of developing other partners, and in terms of our understanding of both the issues and the programs. So the kinds of programs that we've run have included things like the News Challenge, the kind of I don't know how much I'd be happy to talk about any of these. I'll just mention a couple things like every blog that came out of that. Spot.us, which is a program actually that recognizes the fundamentally different relationship between a user of information and the delivery of it online, fundamentally different than the more passive reading of information. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but I do think that it's a different attitude that the user of online information has when he or she assumes that you can change, you own it, you use it, you distribute it yourself, you expect, it isn't just news, you expect to click on a shirt and buy it as you look at it and as quickly move on to the next page. We were looking for ways to engage readers in the decision making about news. And this kid from San Francisco came up with the idea of Spot.us, which recruits freelancers in his case, and they will post their stories, their proposed stories. They will pitch to the public instead of to an editor, and say, I want to do a story on the scandal at the Board of Education. I want to do a story on why the lake is polluted. I want to do a story on traffic. It'll cost me $3,000, $5,000, whatever. Then people will pay up to, I think it's $30, might be $25. Pay up to $30 a piece. It is completely transparent. Everybody who pays is listed alongside the story, and when they get enough money from the crowd, the story is commissioned and done. It has evolved. It's been used by the Oakland Tribune. We've now moved it from standalone in San Francisco to USC, to the journalism school there, where I think he's going to get some significant help from the engineering school on the code, and I think the journalism will improve. But the neatest thing actually was late last year when they posted a freelancer who said she needed $10,000 to do a story on a great garbage patch in the Pacific Ocean. Apparently the currents and forces in the ocean bring together a garbage patch in the Pacific that's supposed to be the size of Texas. And she talked with editors at the New York Times who said that if she did this story, they'd be interested in looking at it for publication. Which is a little bit of a step up from posting on Spot.us to publishing in the New York Times. It caused an uproar at the New York Times. And those of you who remember the slogan, "It pays to advertise in the New York Times," will know that it was true then and it is true now. When there was a controversy, Clark Hoyt, who was the ombudsman at the Times, wrote about it. He quoted a number of editors who were outraged that the Times would do this. He quoted me as saying, "This is the way it's going." He quoted the kid from Spot.us. And shortly after that, I had paid my $25 for the story, and I thought I'd just sort of look at and see who was paying. And there was Piero Midyar, the founder of eBay, had paid $25. Craig Newmark, who started Craigslist and paid $25. I, of course, had. But the best one was the ombudsman from the New York Times. And, of course, the best thing of all is that when the story was done, the editors of the New York Times read it, liked it, approved it, and published it. I think that kind of engagement is huge. That kind of, it's a silly, simple kind of, it's not silly, but it's a simple kind of beginning of trying to figure out how to engage the reader, the user of information in a different and significant way. And I think it's what news organizations need to do more of. We also wanted to engage more players, so we offered $4 million a year to community foundations where we would match whatever they would do to meet the information needs of their communities. Community foundations are all over the country. They are each set up to meet core needs in their community. My belief, my strong belief, is that you cannot run a community in a democracy without free flow of information, and I couldn't figure out why these people were doing nothing about it. So we ended up having seminars in Miami in winter. Of course, it has to be in winter. As Creed Black, Hodding's predecessor, used to say, only our sincere friends visit us in August. But we're about to have our third one, and the change in the community foundation field, I think, has been radical in terms of the acceptance of information as something that is essential, that is a core need in their communities, and that they have some role. We don't really yet have a mature sense of what that role is going to be, but some role, and I'm looking forward to a very different kind of conference on March 1st and 2nd. Any of you who want to come are invited to, because it'll be not a media landscape kind of meeting. It'll be here's what we're doing in Wichita, and here's what we're doing in St. Paul, here's what we're doing in Chicago. Structurally, we also started to use that same device of contests in things like a Miami Arts contest. It was a very easy way of engaging the community and engaging the creativity of the community by making the rules as open-ended and as simple as possible. Arts in South Florida were the rules for the arts contest. Community advancement in Macon, in Georgia. And you end up funding things you would never have thought to do, but that really have resonance in the community. When I went to the delivery of the awards in Macon, I saw the list. I think I probably would have funded 3 out of the 15 we did that. Maybe I think it was more like 20 that we did that day. But I also will tell you that the reaction of that group of 500 people from Macon, which is probably half the town, that really was affirming. The head nodding, the comments, the buzz was all about how we had figured out how to put our finger on the pulse of the town. And people said, "That's a great idea. Now who thought of that?" Well, not me, for sure, and not even our program director. I want to just sort of wrap up with a little bit about the restructuring of Night as a taking of the opportunity, having done some of these different kinds of different approach to the grant making. We will now focus on fewer communities. We'll focus on 8 communities with a resident program director in each. We've decided to double the amount of money that we have in donor advised funds in 18 other community foundations. We had earlier invested $69 million in community foundation donor advised funds. Over the next 7 years, we'll add another $70 million, we will significantly increase our efforts, professional staff on assessment. I think we're now at a point where we are running enough common programs, a library program, for example, as part of our digital access initiatives, where the library in pretty much any of our towns, the computer room turns out to be the most used room in the library. You can ask any librarian, and it's not just in the main library, but in the branches as well. And so, rather than reinvent the infrastructure as we push toward universal digital access, we thought we'd work with the libraries, upgrade the equipment, provide training, and so forth. And that's something that you can measure from city to city and across cities. And I think we'll see both an upsurge in the use of library as community center and in the access of one of the three groups that are on the wrong side of the great digital divide. There are some 60% of Americans who have broadband access, about 40% of Americans who do not. Comcast's figure is 37. And the big reason for the divide tends to be rural location, urban poor, or age. So I think this library programs lend themselves, I think, to learning about how to push out digital access to underserved communities. We are we're at a point in the development of I think this thing turned itself off.
It's like the power cord got in.
And it also disconnected on the back here.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind. I wanted to show I think we're far better known for our work in digital access than before, but also in each of our communities. And I think it's really important that we be able to prove that and be able to confirm that, not just simply because we kind of feel like we're doing better, but because we this is not going to work. I'm just going to ask
If you just plug in the power cord, it can't disconnect it. It's right there.
The power cord can't disconnect, I think.
But you need that password. That's a Duke computer. I don't know when
That's right.
He's got power he doesn't have.
We actually have been doing surveys on ourselves and measuring community reaction to night as to the recognition of night, to the recognition of night programs, to the perception of night as a leader in transformation in the communities, and by every measure, simply telling the story. And it really isn't much more than that, but in consistently and deliberately telling the story about what we're doing and why we're doing it. Every one of those measures came up so dramatically that the pollster who actually did this particular survey told me that he had actually gone back to the data to make sure that he hadn't made a mistake because it just had come up so high. The other kind of surveys that we're doing on ourselves are service survey to make sure that we are not lulled by the fact that if you give money away, there are very few people who are going to tell you that you're an awful person. And so it's important to have independently arrived at assessment of your performance as a service organization and as compared to similar kinds of organizations, not as compared to different kinds of businesses, and that one was a very hard thing for the staff to accept, because most people who join a foundation staff join to do good, and the survey implies that maybe you're not as good as you thought, or that maybe there's room for improvement, I would prefer to say. And we had some very, very hard conversations. The second year, we waited 2 years, and the second round of that is about due. So we'll see how much better we did. But I think it's the kind of thing that focuses a staff on delivering service as opposed to expecting to respond to petitions.
What did you ask about the recognition do you know, did you ask them about the Knight Foundation, what they knew about it, or what did they ask?
We asked, do you know about Knight Foundation? Do you know programs that the Knight Foundation funds? What are the issues that your community has? What is the relevance of Knight Foundation to those issues? Does Knight Foundation matter? That was the kind of and what we had found in the first place was, in the first round, is that people thought we were pretty good on the grant and not particularly engaged in the community and not particularly engaged in the field. And it struck me that for the kind of money we were spending, that we really needed to rethink what we were spending our time and energy on. We were spending time and energy on process as opposed to the subject matter. Now that is really hard to do when you're thin-staffed, and I don't think we're by any means overstaffed. But I think it's one of the consequences of doing that is that you can then more intelligently figure out where do you need to add to staff. We will be adding to staff as a result of those surveys. We'll be adding to staff in a couple of key areas, and the add to staff will have a different set of skills than we would have than the generalists that we would have looked for before, because we find now that we've funded 123 digital experiments, some of those are going to mezzanine stage, and we have zero capacity to be a thought partner to a mezzanine business, as opposed to being the angel investor that a generalist can certainly do. Let me ask you if you,
Let me make one comment.
Sir.
What's really important is that Knight was almost invisible, if not invisible, before this process. And I mean this quite seriously. We had surveyed it, and because of the way we operated, within the communities where you would have thought we were known before Alberto launched this thing, we were virtually unknown. And why does that matter? Because we thought we were trying to bring things into the community. If they don't know you're there, it's very difficult even to be responsive because they don't know where to go to be responsive to. But anyway, but it was zero recognition out there.
And what in the first tranche showed what kind of what level of recognition? Do you remember?
The average, just name recognition,
Right.
for the actual recognition of program, identification of programs was significantly lower,
Sure.
but the name recognition was 50%. And when we first did it, the fellow said, "No, it's all right. I'll just show it on here." The pollster said, who does a lot of this stuff, and he wants to please too. And he said, "Look, you've got 50% recognition. Candidates would kill for that kind of recognition." And I said, "We've been giving money away in this town for 60 years, and only half the leaders, not the people, half the leaders in town even know who we are."
Well, this was a survey of leaders, not.
This was a survey of community leaders, yes. And the reason that matters is that those are the ones who run the Red Cross, who run the soup kitchen, who run the economic development organizations, who are in City Hall. These are our partners, and half of them could not identify a Knight Foundation because we didn't tell them. It wasn't when you said, "By the way, do you know this program?" then of course I know that program. But is there any relationship to Knight Foundation there? No. The way it was structured was really the old newspaper model.
If it's any comfort, the national figures that when the same survey was done by Philanthropy Awareness Initiative about 2 years ago, they surveyed leaders but defined as board members of nonprofit organizations around the country. And of that group, 50% basically knew the name of at least one foundation. They weren't asking about specific reference, but they could name a foundation, 50%. These are the people on the boards which are supposed to be raising money from foundations, and yet they had no knowledge. I mean, 50% of them had no knowledge of it.
In the 2000, I'm just looking at this, and I'm sorry that this didn't work, but the average, it says 2007 study, when they asked for name recognition of Knight Foundation as what specific institutions, organizations, or foundations are having the greatest impact in inspiring innovation and change in their community, 14% said Knight. And we were the largest foundation in many of those communities. And in the 2009 survey, it was 26%, so it was an 86% improvement. Now, the projects did not yet change as much as they're going to change, but they had not yet changed as much. What had changed was the instruction to the program director to tell people about it, and the instruction to the program directors to find partners. And that's the whole thing behind this. This is not about hubris, as much as I enjoy hubris. It is about making sure that people know of the work that's going on, and that you give the opportunity for people to engage in defining what the issues are and what the projects are in that particular community.
There was just one more figure on this subject. I gave a speech at Canada and talked about the fact that on the national surveys, not leadership, but the national public understanding of what a foundation is, it's 12%. I mean, only 12% of the public could name a single foundation. This woman in the audience, who is the president of the largest community foundation in the second largest city in Canada, said, "Oh, Mr. Fleischman, that's pretty good." She said, "We did the same survey, and in our community, only 1% could recognize the name of our foundation."
But with all due respect, Joel and Alberto,
Introduce yourself.
Andrea Bassano.
She's the president of the community.
Yes, no, I know Alberto. How are you? A lot of foundations don't want to be known, so they want to do philanthropy in a quiet way. So unless you're raising money, like a community foundation, which we should be known, so we are going to be doing the survey now, just give me an idea. You don't want to be out there, getting your name out there. You want the names of your grantees who are doing good work out there, getting the credit in the community. So that's
really
a great debate, and we should maybe not open it up right now. But
I think it is the debate.
So I think even as a community foundation, you have many times fundholders or donors who are anonymous fundholders, and they prefer that you do it in a very quiet way. So I think you have a very, very careful dance that you play in terms of you want the name of the community foundation out there, and you want to be recognized, but at the same time you really want the grantees out front and center. Or you want
we're not a community foundation, although we do. In fact, this morning I got a wonderful call from somebody who offered $1 million for one of the media programs that we're doing. So it started off as a great day. So we're not in it for recognition of Knight. It is an attitude we've decided to adopt in our grant making to include the crowd. I don't know. I can't tell you that I'm right. I'm just telling you this is the direction that we've chosen, and we've decided to use the technology available in our major grant making about one of our key areas in media, and then now shifting also to communities to be the only way you're going to be able to process 3,000 applications like we just did for the Night News Challenge is to use use the media available. You character limit the statement of the idea. I don't want you to write me a long proposal. I want you to tell me a really sharp idea. Now, that means, I think it's true, that probably means that people who are fuzzier thinkers, maybe just as smart, but they can't express themselves as clearly, are going to have a tougher time with this than others. But the way that we've done it is short statements of ideas. We like the idea. We're taken by the idea. We ask for a fuller proposal. We bring in outside readers. We vet the programs ultimately and end up out of 3,000 funding maybe 20 of them.
And you forgot to fund
do
ours in the triangle. You just happened to not fund ours. We'll talk about that later on.
Did I mention the outside readers?
Now, where are you going to
No, please.
I'm done.
No, okay, no, you'll be back. What I'm going to do now is, let's open it up and mix it up. I did not ask to go around the table as we usually do and introduce, because we would have spent a long time doing it. So when I call on you, will you please just introduce yourself and where you're from so that Alberto will have a sense of the game? And Ginger, you got the first question.
Ginger Saul, and I'm on the boards of CARE and WWF, and also founder of a small family foundation. And from that perspective, you know, you're right, we're not interested in publicity for people to come to us, but we really are interested in people learning from what we have funded. And in many cases, the grantees are not in optimal positions to share the knowledge that they've learned. And so we would like other funders, foundations, governments, implementers to know about what we're doing. So I wonder, in your survey, did you survey other, people who might be your peer implementers in and out of the foundation field, at governments and agencies and foundations, to see if they knew about you, because that could be really important.
We would only have included them to the extent that they were part of Akron or part of St. Paul or San Jose. And so they would have been included. That kind of person would certainly have been part of the survey, but not because because they lived in and worked in one of the 26 communities where we were surveying. I want to clarify. I mean, I realize the way the way we're moving is not everybody's cup of tea. It is not, and I emphasize again, this is not. I don't see this as a black and white. This is right and that is wrong sort of thing. I just think this is for a foundation that is about trying to figure out how you create informed, engaged communities. I think we need to walk the walk. I think we need not just simply to talk the talk. And so I'm not. If we decide not to do that as Knight, we don't have to raise money. Thank goodness. We have enough staff to process the kind of increased attention that we're getting. Thank goodness, and we can hire and are hiring more. But if we decided we didn't want to do that, we could still apply the same principles of storytelling to our grantees. And I think it's harder to do it when you're not engaged yourself in the story. But I also think it can be done. And I think, for the reasons you just said, I think it is important for people to know that you're working. We're working on figuring out how to manage the huge data dump that the federal government is about to do. How to manage it so that because I don't even know how to even term the amount of data that the Obama administration is about to make public, and it is useless unless you can use it, unless you can read it, unless it's organized. I don't want to be the only one working on that, and so in telling about the kinds of grants we're making, what happens is that today I had a great conversation with Sarah Cohn about some who teaches here, about some of the people that she knows, and she raised the subject because she had read about some of the other stuff that we were doing. That's the point of doing it, so that there is that exchange of information.
I gotta go. Because you're talking about such exciting, great stuff, I just didn't want them to let something pass that you almost elided. Talk about the 8 communities as opposed to the other, because it's another exciting wrench from our tradition.
It's a really different approach to it, because it says we're going to go deep in project. We're going to go deep in projects in these 8 communities, as opposed to pretending that we can equally serve 26 with insufficient funds, insufficient resources of all sorts. And so it is a commitment to those 8. The way we're budgeting for it, by the way, still maintains a requirement. Still recognizes that there are going to be some projects that are going to be simply popular in town, but there are other projects that have got to meet a higher transformational hurdle, so that the actual budgets, Hadi, are no different for those 8 communities, are no different than what they would have been when you were president of NIGHT, literally to the dollar. But the availability of additional dollars for transformational programs is many, many times what that original guideline would be. So it's more of a commitment to those, and it is also a decision to do both institution building in community foundations and to work through those community foundations in the other 18 communities. And we'll do this tranche, and I would not be at all surprised that when we finish this 70 million, we would then do yet another round to continue, because I really do think I really do think that's a very valuable way of doing community projects.
Joel, following up on Hadi's question, how did you choose the 8? I can think of several ways. One, historically, there were the first 8 newspapers, but you could think of ways that give you more information, ways that allow you to learn from different sites. So tell me how that decision.
It was excruciating, because there was no formula that I at least could come up with that was satisfactory. And so in the end, it was a compromise at the Board of Trustees. But there are an original 4 that are the 4 newspapers that are the towns that had newspapers that actually made early contributions to Knight Foundation, and they were Miami, Akron, Detroit, and Charlotte. The last contribution from any of those was before World War II. So you can imagine that was a pretty good investment of about $23,000 in Charlotte, in the Charlotte Observer. And since that time, Clara Knight, who's really the unsung hero of Knight Foundation, was the mother of the 2 founders, died and left about $22,1952. And from that time on, there was never any thought to have any contributions from the company. So even though it was always perceived as being tied to Knight Ridder, in fact, Knight Ridder as an entity never put in a dime, and Knight newspapers since the World War hadn't had to either. So we had the original 4, and then for the other 4, we looked at. We considered geographic diversity. We considered the partners that we had. For example, St. Paul is a place where we have a number of very interesting partners, and have had some really very good successes and both in media with Minnesota Public Radio and in community development with Liz. We considered San Jose and Silicon Valley. Given what we do, it seemed like a logical place for us to plant a flag. The one that I was most sorry to lose was Biloxi, Mississippi, because I think that's one where we have done some of the very best community development work. After the storm, and this is the kind of stuff that a private foundation can do better than anybody, after a storm, Susan Beresford from Ford called me up and he said, "Don't you understand? You're a foundation president now. Foundation presidents don't go to the scene of the disaster. They wait for the white paper a few months later." But I said, I didn't know. I come from a newsroom. So they had a storm. It was a hell of a mess. So what did I got on a plane. I went to, I think I went to Lexington, and then I flew to Mobile, and then I rented a truck, and I drove over, and I slept in the parking lot of the newspaper, because I had to, you got to see the stuff. I came from a world where disaster happens, you look at it, you put it in the paper the next day. The day after that, somebody says, "Here's what we ought to do about it," and then you go on to the next criminal acts murder. So that whatever the next big story is. So what we were able to do, though, because we had Mike Maidenberg and I both went, we made a lot of contacts locally. We had put in $500,000 to the Red Cross and $500,000 to the Salvation Army. But then, I remember it was Stan Tyner, who was the editor of the paper, walked into the parking lot that one morning, and he had a whole bunch of sheaves of paper in his hand. He said, "I've got 40 stories here, and I could put any one of them. My job is to figure out what's the best set of 30 stories, 20 stories, whatever it was he could fit, that is really going to tell people what's happening in this community and what happened, what's going on now, and what's going to happen tomorrow." And I thought that's exactly what we need to do as a community. So, because you need to be able to have an open planning process that engages people, makes people understand, gives people hope. The other thing that I saw, which I know I wouldn't have understood, is that Mississippi had a conceit, and it was that there were no casinos in Mississippi. All of the casinos were on so-called barges that were these big steel planks with cement, about 2 stories worth of cement, that they thought, this thing, and it's offshore. The problem is Katrina didn't get the memo, and when the storm came in, it just blew them away. Literally 4 or 5 buildings that were floated 4 or 5 blocks away. So I stood on the point, and I looked back, and I've spent most of my life in New York City and Miami, and so for me, it's all about real estate. And I looked down the shoreline, and all I could see was prime developable real estate, because all of those old homes had been washed away, and I saw a couple of big casinos that were now 5 blocks inland. And I thought, well, okay, FEMA's never going to allow this foolishness to go on again. But they need the money, so they're going to pass the law saying it's okay to build the casinos. And as soon as that happens, if you don't have an open planning process, nobody who lives there is going to have anything to say with what happens to prime real estate in Biloxi. Because it's all going to be decided at Harrah's Casino, with all due respect, wherever their headquarters are, and at whatever other casino companies were going to be involved and engaged. And so I felt, so I said, because we were there, we told our friends in our local community advisory committee, if anybody wants to play this way and have an open planning process, let's do it. We're in. We'll support it. I went back home. This is when Susan scolded me for not knowing how to play the role of foundation president. And she said, "But as long as you were there, come on up. I want to talk to you. I want to find out what actually happened." And I said, so I went up to Ford, and I looked at it. I was talking to 6 or 7 people who were all really interested. And I said, "What the hell are you doing here? You should all be down there looking at this thing, getting dirt under your fingernails, figuring this thing out for yourselves." We had a great conversation, and I was in the cab on the way from Ford Foundation back to LaGuardia to go back home, and my phone rings. And I wish I could do this. I could do justice to the Mississippi accent of one of the great leaders that I've met, Haley Barbour, who is the governor of he says, Alberto, he said, it's Haley Barber. And I was like, what? Who is? So I thought, I thought it wasn't a joke. It was actually Haley Barber. And he said he wanted to do an open planning process, but he said he couldn't take it to the legislature, because if he took it to the legislature, he'd have to start doing horse trading and appointing people from Jackson and appointing people from the north. And he said, so I've got to have it. Now I'm going to have Jim Barksdale, who is a brilliant man. I used to be chairman of PBS, and Jim did some think stuff, forward strategic planning for PBS. One of the best minds you'll ever meet. He had been chairman of FedEx. He was the guy who chaired Netscape. He was a Republican, but had supported the Democrat in Mississippi because of a childhood friendship. He was originally from Mississippi. So he said, I'm getting Barksdale to chair this thing, and I've got this architect that actually I'd recommended, a fellow named Andres Duany. And he said, this architect from down your way, Duany. And I said, Duany? I said, no, Duany. I said, Governor, and I had a kind of out-of-body experience as I was sort of suddenly looking at myself, telling the governor of Mississippi, I said, Governor, you get Barksdale and you get Duany, and we'll pay for it. And I thought, and he said, and he thought the same thing, and he said, well now, son, he said, I saw, just all of you who know these accents, imagine this. And he with a Mississippi accent, and he said, well now, son, this isn't going to be tens of thousands of dollars or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's going to be some real money here. And I said, and I thought, thank you for the pause. I said, Governor, you get Barksdale and you get Duany, and either we'll pay for it or I'll find the rest of the money. Because I figured Susan was already on the hook. I'd go to Ford, I'd beg, I'd do anything, and she would somehow come through. And in fact, we didn't need to, because Barksdale put up $1 million of his own money. We put up $1 million, and within 3 weeks, this is not an exaggeration, we had 200 architects, engineers, city planners, lawyers, citizens. We did 7 charrettes, for 7 days, 11 charrettes, and by the middle of the end of November, early December, Barksdale was able to present the governor of Mississippi with a blueprint for the development of the South Coast. What that did was, first of all, really important, it gave people hope. It showed how to move forward. It showed that we could move forward. It showed how to move forward. It also did something really important, which is that with all the billions of dollars that was going to come in there, it gave people signposts against which to measure.
Well, our parish has to have a plan because they're going to leave our school out of this and put it down there. So parishes started their own stuff. And the result was, for quite a long time, and the scars still show, a great deal of chaos in a planning process that desperately needed coherence and intelligence and so forth. So what's the difference between a foundation president who gets a call from the governor and says, I'll back it, and foundations who are similarly well-meaning, who want to collaborate on something, and yet in this heart of darkness of New Orleans, with a similar intent, they came out totally on the wrong side. Is there any lesson or idea to be taken from those two experiences?
I think, first of all, the lesson is not that it was the foundation president. All that we did, that Mike Maidenberg and our local community advisory committee people and I did, was to work real hard to get lucky, to work real hard to be around and available. Mm-hmm. If you're not around, if people don't know, again, it's back to the same thing. If people don't know that you're open and willing and disposed, so, but that wasn't it. To me, it was leadership and timing. You didn't have the leadership in New Orleans that you had in Mississippi. This is not a Republican-Democrat thing.
Right.
This just happens to be a guy who's extremely focused, very effective, and you had local leadership in the 2 cases I know best, in Biloxi and Gulfport, that was actually really rooted in the town. And so we had a lot to work with. We had a lot to work with. We had the contacts with Dwani. They didn't know Dwani from, we had worked with Dwani on this kind of process in Miami, in Macon, in Duluth, in Miami, in Macon, in Duluth, and in San Jose. So we knew the guy had range, and could do this sort of process. So the leadership is, the first, out of the first 8 reasons, the first 8 are about leadership. Then comes being open to it, and then the last is taking advantage of our private status to be responsive. The timing really mattered. If we had waited, in fact, I was just in Biloxi about a month and a half ago, and people there are grousing about the fact that we've lost that sense of cohesion, that we're losing that sense of cohesion, that we're falling back into a lot of different kinds of camps and so forth. Well, at the time of the crisis, and that's normal. The same thing happened in New York after 9/11. The same thing happened in Miami after Hurricane Andrew. That's the nature of these things. What we were able to do as a private foundation was to say, don't wait for the legislature, don't ask the city council, don't ask anybody, just do it. And as a private foundation, we could do that. There's no way that the city council was going to be able to do that, and to do it when everybody was geared toward working together. Later on, there were going to be splits. We just did a report on information needs of communities, and with Aspen Institute, we decided we were not going to be about the newspaper business. We were going to be about articulating the information needs of communities, take a snapshot of where we are, and suggest public policy for how to get from where we are to where we ought to be, to where a community in a democracy needs to be. And we issued the report. The chairman of the FCC, the chief, the guy who's got my favorite title in the world, which is Chief Technology Officer of the United States of America. He was there. He worked at the White House, and the head of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They all came. We all sang Kumbaya, and it was great. The next step is where we get into really hard policy decisions. And what we've done is we funded some programs with an organization called freepress.org, which is frankly center-left. We're doing Aspen, which will do center, and we're doing American Enterprise Institute, which is center-right. None of these are really radical, on the fringe kinds of groups, but they do come at it from different perspectives, and it really matters because money's on the table now. Now we're talking about who's going to get the broadband access money and who's not going to get it, whose subsidies are going to be rerouted to something else. Because telcos get lots of subsidies for rural phone lines and so forth, and maybe some of that gets rerouted. That's going to cause lots of issues. Well, it's a similar kind of process. Biloxi, Mississippi acted while everybody was holding hands, and New Orleans waited, I think, too long.
And I think there's also an issue of leadership on the part of foundations there, as well as on the part of the community, whether it's the government.
Yeah.
We'll talk more.
There's no foundation really that had the same kind of relationship
Of
with New Orleans. There's no single foundation that they had.
They were unknown.
Exactly.
Carl Stauber Danville Regional Foundation on the Virginia-North Carolina line. Did it matter? The one thing I haven't heard you talk about, Mike Maidenberg had been through a major flood. He'd been the publisher in the Red River Valley, got a Pulitzer for the way they covered the flood. Did having Mike there, and you want to talk about expertise, that's a very unique kind of expertise. And nobody else, no other foundation in America had that. Did that make any difference?
Yes. It absolutely made a difference. In fact, when the thing first happened, Mike and I was in Akron, and Mike was in Miami, and we talked, and he said, I've been meaning to put down some of the lessons learned. And I said, what the hell are you waiting for? He said, hang up the phone, put it, and he started very deliberately to put down, these are the lessons learned. This is the natural ebb and flow of the crisis, the post-crisis, the post-crisis, and so forth. He wrote it all down. We went together. We slept in the same parking lot. We snuck into the same areas where you weren't allowed to go, because we are, after all, newspaper people. That's what you do.
You could have been a terrorist.
Well, but we weren't. And he was enormously useful and calming for the people that we were talking to, who were sitting down talking to somebody whose town had washed away, just like theirs had.
Yeah. Mary, you had your hand up?
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You, Ted.
No, go ahead.
Ted? Pick and choose.
Go ahead.
Mary Malcasso with the Ziesman Reynolds Foundation. I guess I have several questions. I'm currently trying to decide. So I guess the question I'm going to ask is about investigative journalism, which I think seems to be shrinking as a resource in the traditional newspaper business. And there have been efforts like ProPublica at the national level to continue that kind of work. And I'm curious if how a smaller, kind of regionally focused foundation might think about trying to stimulate the same kind of outcomes that good investigative journalism results in. And I know, the example that you used kind of referenced, sort of like an eBay of citizen journalists, I guess, is what the one that you were talking about. But there's so much information out there among our grantees in terms of the issues that they work on. So I think that's one resource. There are trained investigative journalists that are out there perhaps without jobs or are underutilized, and people aren't reading newspapers as much. So there's the whole blogosphere or whatever. It seems like it's just this kind of swirling mass of opportunity out there that's not being effectively used. And so I'm trying to see if you have any insight into how we might help continue to bring the sunlight of good investigative journalism, but in ways that are going to effectively reach people.
I think one of the problems of using an example like Spot.us is that it suggests that's certainly not the answer. So I'm really happy for your question. In fact, I think there are a number of online investigative operations, probably most of whom we fund to one degree or another, whether it's ProPublica, where we not only fund it, I'm on the board, or others like Centers for Investigative Journalism in San Francisco. Boston University has a Center for Investigative Journalism, and all of these are online. All of these are, except for ProPublica, the others tend to be geographically oriented. One of the reasons I'm so happy with our community information challenge is that some of the responses have been from the Community Foundation in New Haven. I'll give you just two, which started the New Haven Independent, which is an online investigative journal, and the Community Foundation in San Diego started the Voice of San Diego. The Voice of San Diego is kicking butt. It is one of the best, liveliest, most enterprising news operations going anywhere. They're regularly beating the San Diego Union. They have now contracted with NBC, I think it's NBC, it might be CBS, the local CBS affiliate, to do some of their reporting, because because the TV station has a different kind of boss, and they need to deliver that sort of profit. And so here's the Voice of San Diego selling its services to CBS and NBC while being funded primarily by the Community Foundation, ourselves, and an individual contributor. If you're really interested, we're gathering, I think it's 15 or 16 of these operations. MinnPost out of Minneapolis, Gotham Gazette in New York, Village Soup in Maine, and the two that are the most like traditional newspaper models. There's an operation in three. One is an operation in San Francisco, one in Hawaii, and one in Texas. All of them are investigative focused. The one in Hawaii is largely funded by Piero Midyar from eBay. The one in San Francisco is a combination of KQED, which is the public broadcasting station, Berkeley Journalism School, the New York Times, and a significant contribution from a fellow named Warren Hellman. We're involved in that. And the one in Texas is the one that I think, if I had to bet money on who's going to survive as a business, it would be the guys in San Diego and the folks in Texas, because what they've got is a wealthy individual totally committed to the idea of information in his community, and even more totally committed to Texas. He's not going anywhere. He's not like Mr. Sherman, who used to own 16% or 17% of Knight Ridder, who actually worked for shareholders at Legg Mason. I think that's great. But Mr. Sherman not only did not, but could not, because of his fiduciary responsibility, care whether the Miami Herald had one reporter for all of education, or a reporter for grammar, a reporter for high school, and two reporters for collegiate news like we used to have. All he cared about was, will you deliver the short-term returns that I have promised my investors? Thornton is interested in a break-even business, and his name is John Thornton. In a break-even business, he knows that to do this business right, you've got to hire editors who actually know what they're doing. I think he's hired the best. Evan Smith is the former editor of the Texas Tribune. He is a piece of work. I would not want to manage this guy. He is a really independent individual. Of course I want to manage the guy. But the fact is, Thornton's not going away either. He's going to run the business, just like Jack Knight did, just like the Chandlers did, just like the Sulzbergers did. This is something I think we ought to take seriously, take note of, and take heart in. I think having community foundations, place-based foundations, because they're not just community foundations, the William Penn Foundation was actually one of our grantees in the first round of the information challenge, although they didn't accept the money because of their, whatever their things. So we ended up agreeing that we would both pay the money into this thing called School Notebook, which was news about the school system that both of us thought was lacking in town, and so we went in fact, as a joint venture, but it came out of the Community Information Challenge. Similarly, in Texas, the Houston Foundation did not want to receive a grant from us, but they were interested and were not about to apply to our contest because, as our friend explained to me, it's just not what we do. And I said, okay, that's fine. I'm not interested in what you do. What you won't do, I want to know what you will do. And he said, well, we're thinking of putting in $500,000 into this thing. I said, great, we're in for a quarter. And I think there are a lot of these experiments that are cropping up, and I think place-based foundations, if they begin to look around for them, Village Soup is a great example. So Village Soup started out as a kind of a local weekly, except it was online. They got so successful they actually bought the physical local weeklies. There's stuff there. There's stuff happening. It is not enough yet, but I am very, very excited about what's happening on the investigative front. On the regular news front, that's where I really am scared, because I look at my own Miami Herald, and nobody knows their problems better than me. I know the demands on it. I know about running that business because I used to. And I also know what we used to report. I know that we used to have 5 reporters at City Hall. That's just City Hall, not County Hall. And I know they have 1. And he sometimes doubles it. Bob Schieffer the other day told me that his brother is running for governor of Texas. I didn't know this. But his brother is running for governor of Texas. He goes to Corpus Christi, which is a major city. And the reporter that is interviewing his brother says, "I'm glad you came." He call it a Thursday and Friday. He came on a Thursday or Friday. He said, "I'm glad you came today." And he said, "Well, I'm glad to be here." He said, No, I'm glad you came today, because if you had come Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, I only work part-time. I wouldn't have come out to cover your speech. The guy's running for governor. So the kind of day-to-day, week-in, week-out information that we must have in order to manage our affairs in a democracy. I think that's the biggest problem, and I don't think it's at the Washington Post or at the New York Times or at the level of the national papers, however much I do think there are issues and problems there. I think the biggest issues are at the level of the Durham paper and the Chapel Hill and the local papers around the country, and it is a real crisis. And I don't know what the model is for those.
We're going to do Ted and Jay. Is Jay here? You left? Okay. Ted? Welcome. Get that. Okay, but hold on, Leslie. Ted first.
Okay, I'm Ted Fisk. I'm a recovering print journalist, let's say.
Recovering?
Recovering? Well, yeah. Okay.
That means you never get over
I'm
it.
still trying to figure out what the world is like. What are you still investing in education journalism? And if so, what's your sort of analysis of what's happening and your strategy for doing this?
The answer is yes. We still are actively engaged with almost 24 endowed chairs, for example. We have mid-career training programs at Berkeley, USC, University of Maryland. We have mid-career programs through NewsU and through online programs at American and Poynter Institute. We have the Knight Fellows program still, with which we're still very actively engaged, and the Knight Wallace program, the ones at Stanford and the ones at Michigan. All of those are still very much part of what we do. It is a real shame that those used to be programs for I don't know quite how to say this without, but for really outstanding individuals who would graduate to that. But right now they're about the only programs for anybody. The industry is doing less than zero in terms of the training of journalists. One, I mentioned earlier that a big disappointment for me was the way the journalism schools. Now, so that describes an opportunity, and it's an opportunity, I think, for journalism schools to step in. I believe they haven't. I believe that by and large, journalism schools have continued to teach what was, not what is or is going to be. And that's why we got together with Carnegie and have tried through an initiative in partnership with that foundation to try to cause some reform in the journalism curriculum through a subsidiary of that project called News 21 to pick best and brightest and do sort of showcase investigative journalism training, and that program involves, I think it's now up to a dozen schools that includes Columbia, Missouri, a number of others, even Nebraska, Arizona, UNC, and now also includes Harvard as the place, with Alex Jones as the one who's trying to corral the journalism deans to occasionally take positions together. If you think you had a tough job, you should try his. So yeah, there is that. But you know what I'd really love is for schools to be pushing us, for schools to knock down our doors, saying we've got these different ideas. It does happen. University of Arizona, Callahan, is one of the few. I'd say Mick Lemon is one of the more creative at Columbia. John Levine is a very aggressive dean for his journalism school. We've done a number of interesting things with them, not least being we just gave them 12 scholarships to bring engineers to the journalism school, because the people who are turning our world inside out ought to know something about the story. But in terms of real leadership, I don't see it. So what we're probably going to do later this year, I think it would probably be mid-year, is to propose some news testing labs that will be a request for proposal for consortia that would include a news operation, a university that has an engineering school and a journalism school, and that news operation may be a TV station, maybe a radio station, maybe a newspaper. Obviously, it all includes online, and what we would do is we would underwrite the cost of their experiments with new media, with some of these new ways of engaging the readers. And, if you have ideas about how to get journalism schools to step up, we're willing to play.
I don't have any idea. I mean, they haven't stepped up to very much in the past. I guess there's no reason why they would start now, but it would be helpful if they would.
I really think the reason, in my view, the reason is that the opportunity is different. It used to be that the industry, by and large, funded things. You remember American Newspaper Institute in suburban Washington, the media center at Northwestern, all those were funded by the industry. Go try to do that now. If they weren't in doubt, they wouldn't exist.
We're going to do a couple more. Leslie, I'm going to leapfrog and then come back to you for Jay, Leslie, and then we'll maybe take one more and then we'll close it up. Jay?
We're very fortunate today to have a Duke alum, Robert McDowell, who's actually a commissioner at the FCC, who's here speaking at classes today. So I've heard you both talk and read your speeches about broadband, and I was wondering if each of you could talk about how you think about the principles that might guide government policy that is involved in broadband. When economists look at it, they either say it's an issue of equity or it's an issue of funding something that generates positive spillovers in the community in the form of voting or health or education. But I wondered if each of you could share with the students here especially what principles do you think might guide government policy with regard to broadband?
I would love to hear you answer. Because you guys are about to issue some guidelines.
So you're on the spot.
I've been here absorbing. I didn't know I was going to have to actually contribute. This is terrific. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to come here today. This has been absolutely fascinating. And thank you very much for the Night Commission report as well. And we love the thrust of what you did so much. We're going to co-opt all your ideas, and we had our own public notice that we issued a couple weeks ago. So there's an open docket at the FCC on the information needs of communities. So we welcome everybody to comment in that proceeding. So thank you. So yes, our National Broadband Plan, as part of the Stimulus Act, is due to Congress. Well, originally it was due February 17th. The Chairman Janikowski, asked for a 28-day, one lunar month for some reason, extension on that. So we will have it presented to us formally March 16th. I'm supposed to receive the text of it actually on February 17th. So there's a lot of discussion. We're getting some briefings this week. I'm actually here this week, so I'm not getting a briefing, but my staff is back at the office. So I think it's going to cover a lot of areas, and we could spend a lot of time answering the question you just asked. But the idea is, how do you make broadband ubiquitous and affordable? The latest Pew figures, which are now probably stale by a year, show roughly 2/3 of the country has broadband adoption. That number has been growing. It's not perfect. There's a long ways to go. We want fatter and faster pipes available to more Americans. So how do we get there from here? I think it'll look at a number of areas. Wireless is the fastest growing area for broadband. The average American consumer still has a choice of 5 wireless carriers. That's in addition to the telco broadband provider and the cable broadband provider. There's more coming over the horizon from some auctions. We had a big auction in 2006 and one just 2 years ago in 2008. Hopefully more availability coming over the horizon there. But we have to focus on unserved and underserved areas. I think part of the plan will probably say we have I don't want to filibuster here because I know it's the very end of this meeting, but we have a $7+ billion a year fund, a subsidy fund that we administer our universal service program. And it was really premised on old analog voice service for rural areas, but also high-cost areas, and lifeline, people who are eligible for food stamps and such in urban areas, let's say, lifeline support as well. So subsidies across a lot of different demographics and geographic areas. I sense the plan will recommend that broadband be a subsidized service. Our universal service program is bloated and broken and archaic, and it needs to be fixed. Probably needs to be fixed first before we try to keep on top of it a brand new subsidy program. This is in addition to the stimulus grants administered by the Department of Commerce and Department of Agriculture. That's another $7.4 billion, which are starting to trickle out of the executive branch right now for an independent agency, not part of the executive branch. So I think it's going to look at a lot of things, more spectrum, probably some subsidies, what can be done to encourage more private sector investment, and it's going to be probably several hundred pages long, so there'll be a lot of findings, a lot of new data, surveys, and such. So that'll be very, very interesting. It'll dovetail nicely with a lot of private sector research and work. Then it'll spawn a number of notices of proposed rulemaking at the Commission. By some estimates, maybe upwards of 40, so which is a lot. So that will probably consume the bandwidth of the Janikowski FCC through the first Obama term anyway. So then we'll see what happens with that, of course. But so there'll be a lot of work going on. That, in conjunction with our media ownership and other proceedings, makes for a very busy year. But it remains to be seen. So I wish we were meeting on February 18th. I can tell you more about what the text looks like. But I don't know yet. We have an independent broadband team within the commission that's going to present it to us. It's still unclear as to whether or not there'll be a formal commission vote on that, whether or not commissioners will have an editorial privilege or not, or will it just sort of be sent up to the Hill. My sense it's going to be sent up. We're not going to have many editing privileges. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
I think it's good. I thought it was interesting.
At least one person.
For me, the great news in all of this is that the FCC has taken this on as a primary front burner kind of issue. I don't think that was the case before, and I think it deserves to be. And I think there's a role for those of us who are outside of that to try to move it faster. As was talking with Luisa Viñas from the Ford Foundation the other day, and I think they will begin to become. I know they're planning to become involved in this area. And his view was, how do you tell a 7th grader in rural America that it's okay because in 7 years there will be broadband access in your rural area because it will be cheap enough. The technology will become cheap enough that it will be okay for a commercial interest to do it. And in the meanwhile, She's now no longer in 7th grade. She's in college competing with people who had this kind of privilege before. We viewed it from the beginning as a question of it's the Jack Knight question and a question of the access to information. You don't pay a tax to go into the town hall. You don't pay a tax to go into the mall. You don't pay a tax to participate in politics, and yet in the new digital world, in the digital town hall, you do have to pay a tax, and if we need to resolve that. That isn't the way that we've run things before. So I am thrilled that you guys are focused on this, and we will continue funding left, right, and center to help out. The one thing you didn't mention is that the chair hired a senior. I don't know what his title, Steve Waldman's title is, but it's
I can't remember his title, but good guy. Yeah.
But it's a senior level official at the FCC to focus on some of these issues, which I take as a further indication of serious interest on the part of the commission to grapple with these issues.
Leslie, we'll finish with you.
So my question is not about media, but it's back to grant making. I was very curious about your decision to move from a more traditional responsive grant making to contests as a way to get people's ideas in. And especially in your example of a contest about arts in southern Florida, kind of what the difference was and what you expected to get from a contest about the arts as opposed to a more traditional responsive grant making, that you said we're going to give a grant to the arts in South Florida, and here's your grant deadline and here's your application to do. And also what you think the kind of implications of that are.
Well, you remember part of what I was trying to do was to sort of break a thought logjam, what I perceived as a thought logjam at the foundation, at our foundation. I wanted people to let go of a notion that we were supposed to have the answer. That was particularly so on the journalism side, where I thought it was foolish to pretend that you had the answers. We didn't even engage on the whole question of broadband until 2.5 years in, when we realized that if you're not online, you don't have a chance to play. And so some of this was just a way of opening up forcing ourselves to open up our own willingness to consider ideas that were different from the more traditional journalism training funding that we had always been doing. On the community side, not dissimilar. There are a lot of things that we funded as a result of these contests that I just don't think would ever have come up in the course of regular endowment type grant making. I think maybe because the vehicles weren't there. I don't know that we would have ever heard of the kid who came up with the idea of turning a miniature golf park into a sculpture garden. These aren't things that are going to change the course of Western civilization, but it sure had an impact on that neighborhood. And part of what we're trying to do is to engage the community, to make people feel, believe, and act like they actually have some say in their lives. And so it felt like it was a tactic that was working on the news side. It had helped open up our minds to a whole lot of things on the journalism program that we would never have considered before. And so I thought, well, let's try it on the community side. When we announced the arts initiative, it was actually 5 years, $40 million. $20 million was in 3 endowments. $10 million to the Art Museum to bring 45,000 kids a year through the Art Museum. $5 million to the Contemporary Art Museum for the curator in that museum died and went to heaven because she's got money for 2 shows and maybe 3 a year of stuff that she couldn't get anybody else to fund because it's all the really cutting edge stuff, and she finds it anywhere in the world and brings it to Miami. And then $5 million to New World Symphony, which is the big orchestral academy in Miami, and that is specifically for their new media in a new building that Frank Gehry designed and is all, I think, will be ready next year. We have done some directed traditional type of funding, but at the same time, I wanted to engage. I wanted to have people think of ourselves in Miami as an art place, and it's just amazing. I mean, the thousands of applications that come up, the number of people that participate in this, the buzz, the commentary, the sense of this as a place where art happens. It's not just because of this. There are lots of other things going on in Miami, and maybe this would be the wrong kind of thing to do in Wichita. I don't know, another of our communities. But you've got to look at what the underlying theme of the community is and go with that, I think, and go with that trend and leverage it. And I think we have in using this.
So do you think it causes people to be more creative and innovative when you cast it as a contest as opposed to when you cast it as a grant application?
I think it causes many, many more people to feel like they're engaged, to feel like they have a shot at participating. I think you do end up with, if you bring in a diverse enough group of outside readers, you do end up with people getting unbelievably passionate about things you probably would never have funded in the normal course. There are some of the things that we fund through that process that are unusual, and there are others that are very much more traditional. What I know for sure is that we had 1,600 applications, and that's at least 1,000, whatever the number was, 1,600 people who are thinking about art, who are engaged in art, who think they've got an idea that maybe could get funded. I think a remarkably low number were professional grant maker kinds of produced. You can almost always tell when it's just slightly too well written that you get a little suspicious about it. But by and large, I'm delighted by it. On the news challenge side, I think we're at a point where we need to think whether that idea is spent, and we need to keep challenging ourselves and maybe start making bets of the kind that we started to do when we funded these 12 or 13 online news operations. Those all came out of, in one form or another, one of the 2 contests. And I think what we'll probably end up doing in the next iteration of this is doing a continuing funding of those operations as they become stable businesses, and then we won't be doing it anymore. So I think we need to evolve the use of the tactic. The tactic can become as ossified as whatever process we had before. I just find that in a world that's changing as fast as media is changing, something that is as rule-bound and tradition-bound as what we were doing in journalism funding is really not likely to be responsive to the best and most creative thinking. It also puts a real burden on us to be smart about it, because that's something else we weren't really, we fund. You do, and then maybe somebody writes a report, but I think we feel a much greater pressure to understand the field, to participate in the field, and to follow up.
So that these arts awards have reports that they have to do excellence and kind of impact what they do?
Yes. Now, I will not vouch for the quality of some of those reports, because these are artists after all, and they get inspired or they don't get inspired. But in a town operation like that, it's comparatively easy to fund. We only do call it 20 a year. We have a resident program director. He's very much engaged in that part. These are very well known to us projects, so we know who's doing it and who's not. And I don't think it'll ever get so big that we won't.
Alberto, I want to thank you on behalf of our group. The vast breadth and depth of what we talked about was terrific. All that was promised and more. I invite you to come back for our next FERG, which will have here with us Dina Powell, who is a managing director at Goldman Sachs.
She's terrific.
Who is quite a remarkable lady, particularly running a program called 10,000 Women with regard to empowering 10,000 women around the world in raising themselves up in their communities, if you will. But you'll hear more about it from her than from me. So thanks very much, Alberto. And,